Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. And we will proceed now to pages 17 to 20 of the report, and that's the financial context, provisional local government settlement and specific grants. That's 4.2 to 4.6. We'll start with 4.2, the financial context. If anyone has any comments or observations to make, questions, please raise your hand. Councillor Ross Pennell-Thomas, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I hope you can consider this as part of the financial context, which is around budget reserves. I think it's overarching in terms of the conversation that we're about to have around the financial context. It's an age-old question. It's an annual question, and I think it's a question this year that means more than ever before, given the extraordinary financial context in which we find ourselves. I've been a member 10 years. This is probably the worst budget setting process and the sort of circumstances behind the scenes that I've ever come across. So I just wondered, a question really for Caris, what consideration has been given in the coming financial year to drawing down a portion of our reserves? Is it feasible? And as a drop-down question from that, really, is it sensible that we may potentially use a portion of our reserves to plug a gap just for the forthcoming financial year? And I think it's a question that's posed to members by residents on a regular basis. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Pennell-Thomas. Caris, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and apologies, my connection dropped out earlier on. Thank you for the question, and I think you're right, it is one that comes up on an annual basis, really. My answer would be, you'll see details later on at table 8 of the report in relation to reserves in particular and outlining what we've got, and those have been shared with members as we've closed the accounts and they're regularly updated for you. I think the question was, is it feasible to use them and is it sensible? I think to reassure you, we are looking and have been looking very, very closely at our reserves because of the financial position that we find ourselves in. You'll also know that the vast majority of our reserves are earmarked. In other words, they've been put aside to meet particular pressures or developments or requirements that have already been identified by the council. So it's not an easy job to review those, but we are, just to make sure that they are reserved for reasons that we still think are priorities and for things that we still believe are going to happen. Our council fund is standing at just over 10 million, and that is in line with the external guidance that we have with regard to how high your council fund should be or otherwise. Basically, that money is unallocated and it's supposed to help the day-to-day running of the council and enable us to have monies that we can access quickly if we need to do so. I would certainly recommend that you don't take that below the level that it is, because, you know, just to remember that we have a net budget of 341 million, so 10 million as a general fund on that is not a high level at all. Your question with regards to would it be sensible? I think, you know, I suspect you get this response every time you ask the question. If you use your reserves, what you're actually doing is pushing a problem further down the line. And it's like us with our personal accounts, you take the money out of your savings and once it's gone, it's gone. I think a particular concern for me about using reserves for the coming financial year is that the predictions that we have are that our financial position is not going to improve in the coming years. In fact, it may deteriorate. You'll see in the report that the indicative allocation for local authorities in Wales for the following few years is only 3.1%. Now, none of us know where inflation will be. None of us know where our service pressures will be by the time we get there. But we are anticipating very difficult number of years going forward. Therefore, in answer to your question, is it sensible? My view is, or my advice would be, that you shouldn't pull down on those reserves unless we absolutely have to for the coming financial year, only because the current financial modelling shows we are going to have to continue to make savings, service reductions in coming years, and you are just going to compound that problem if you try and buffer it by using reserves in the coming year. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Caris. Councillor Pennell-Thomas, are you content with that response? response?
Yeah, I think that covers that quite comprehensively. I think you're absolutely right. I think we're storing problems potentially, and reserves could probably only be used to fund and to plug a gap in something that's only happening in that financial year, not continuing. And I think we can see from this budget report those pressures are going to continue for many years to come. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Gareth.
Thank you, Councillor Peniel-Thomas. Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Thanks very much. I have two questions on 4.2.8, if possible, please. They are on the funding for the increased rate of £9.90 an hour to £10.90 an hour for social care, but it says that this is by June 2023. I wondered if we've got an update on this, because obviously we've got a lack of carers, and this is critical for us to be able to recruit and provide the services to our residents. And the second question was on the funding is also being provided to support Wales' ongoing humanitarian response to the war in Ukraine. Now, I know hosts get money for looking after, for having Ukrainian refugees in their house. But I wondered if this funding also covers the fact that the 6 months is up for a lot of these families, and there's an increased strain on our housing stock because they're being made homeless or they are going into our houses. Does that cover any of that as well, or is that something that we've had to pay for ourselves as a local authority to house these refugees once they've left the host families? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Two detailed questions there. Is anyone in a position to provide a response to Councillor Williams? Caris, please.
Yes, certainly. With regards to your query on the real living wage, we work very, very closely with our external providers to make sure that any changes to those rates, we get out to them as quickly as possible so that there aren't any gaps. So we will work with them as soon as we can once the rates are all confirmed, and assuming that the money is in the budget, we will put those payments out to our providers as quickly as possible. And you will see in the pressures that are identified for you in Appendix A this morning that there is proposals in there to fully fund the impact of that particular cost pressure going forward into the next financial year. I can see that Councillor Good wants to come in. I don't know whether he wanted to answer the question around support for Ukrainian refugees.
Yeah, thanks, Caris. Happy to bring in Councillor Good if he wishes to do so.
I think if Caris wants to finish the answer, I was sort of jumping in as she jumped in.
There we are, Caris. He's passed back to you. Lucky you.
Okay, and I've caught that ball. So we know that there have been discussions going on, because what Councillor Amanda Williams has raised is a very valid point, which is that the support that has been made available so far to support hosts who are providing accommodation to people who come over from the Ukraine, is the original agreement was that funding would be for 12 months. And a number of our hosts actually will be hitting that 12 months now very soon. Others will hit it later on in the year. I know that discussions have been going on at Welsh Government level with regards to how we can extend that and what funding can be made available to do that, and the basis on which it would be done. I'd also say as well, I don't know whether members are aware, but we did make a one-off uplift payment to the host families over Christmas, acknowledging the additional costs and pressures that they were experiencing, and we were able to fund that from the money that has been paid to us by UK and Welsh Government. So we were able to make that one-off uplift. So I know there are discussions going on nationally about extending that, and I think that's what the money referred to in this particular budget paper is about.
Thank you, Caris. You content with that, Councillor Good? You don't need to intervene any further?
Yeah, I think Caris has covered that off really well. I mean, obviously, as she mentioned, there is considerable interest from Julie James, the Minister in Welsh Government, on providing further support for hosts and for our Ukrainian guests. We are in discussions and continue to have discussions on that, and we can bring an update as soon as possible. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Good. Given the fact that Councillor Pennell-Thomas raised the matter of reserves, it'd probably be remiss of me not to mention this at this stage. It does go beyond our current area, but on page 23, you mentioned the MTFS budget reduction contingency reserve. Now, while you say that no allocations have been made to date in this financial year from this reserve, can you remind me how much we hold in this particular reserve for this purpose? Caris or Deb are probably best placed, I would say, to answer this question.
Yes, so I was just going to ask Deb if she had that figure, if she had that figure at her fingertips.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just trying to find it, Chair. But I think originally when we set it up, it was about £1 million or £800,000, and it was back in the days when the budget reduction targets that we had were a lot higher. But we haven't had to draw on it the last couple of years because the budget reductions haven't been quite so high. But obviously it is a one-off earmark reserve. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Deb.
Sorry, everything seems to be frozen on my screen. So yeah, it is a one-off earmark reserve. We haven't drawn on it for the last couple of years, but it's definitely less than £1 million. But my computer seems to have frozen as well now, so I think it's working its way around the finance officers. Apologies.
No problem. Just for clarity, though, the MTFS contingency reserve is not the same as the budget pressure, I believe, that you include in one of the appendices of £1 million to support corporate-wide budgets. That's not the same thing, is it?
No, this is a specific. No, sorry, yeah. Chair. No, this is a specific earmarked reserve which we draw down, and obviously, like all reserve, once it's gone, it's gone. Whereas the budget pressure we've put in would be a recurrent budget pressure, and the one that you're referring to in the appendix is for pressures that we've not quite finalised yet, then which we're hoping to finalise over, the next month or two, which will be allocated out there as a permanent budget pressure.
Sure, thanks for that clarification. When you do find the MTFS contingency reserve, perhaps you can just drop a note to one of the scrutiny officers to remind us how much it is, so that we just have sight of that. That's very helpful. Yeah. Thanks very much indeed. So do any members have any other comments on pages 17 to 20? That is paragraph 4.3 to 4.6 in your paper packs. Okay, we'll move on to page 21 then, and current year financial performance. If there are any questions, please raise your hand. I have one question on page 21 and table 1 with regards to other corporate budgets. This is quite a significant underspend of £5.778 million. So I think it would be useful, not necessarily today, but if we have a breakdown per cost centre, if possible, perhaps Caris or Deb can arrange for that to be sent to us so that we can consider that at our next meeting on the 31st of January. Is that possible?
We can certainly do that for you, Chair. I'd also refer you to the budget monitoring report that went to Cabinet yesterday afternoon, where there is some breakdown in there of what those overspends are, but we can certainly have a look at that and provide more detail if required.
Okay, that's very kind. Thank you, Caris. Unless there are any other comments on current year financial performance, we will move to the MTFS 2023-24 to 26-27 and the MTFS principles, delivery of budget reduction proposals and scrutiny and challenge. That's 4.8 to 4.14 within our packs, pages 22 to 27. And I'll come to Councillor Amanda Williams first.
Thanks very much. I've got a couple of questions on this on page 22. The first one, the one council approach, and I raise this every year, and so it would be remiss of me not to raise it again. that when we are in extreme circumstances, where I know Mark has told us in the past that every penny counts and nothing is off the table when we're looking at how we can make savings, I raise every time simple things like working together, and I still don't think we're working together, because each year I'm told, oh, we'll look into that and we'll get back in touch with you, is simple things like in Coity, there are children still getting a bus to Coity Primary School because they haven't got a footpath on the road. And I think we're still not seeing that joined up thinking between directorates, because education are paying for a bus. You can see the school from these houses, and a footpath along Heel Spencer would mean that all those children would be able to walk to school, and we wouldn't be paying for a bus, and obviously the impact on the environment as well. So that's my first issue. I don't know if you want me to pause there.
Yeah, you can pause there, Councillor Williams, and that can be answered by whomever would like to take it. Any offers?
I know that Councillor Williams does consistently raise this every year. I don't think the Corporate Director for Education and Family Support is with us currently, or indeed the Corporate Director for Communities, but perhaps the Chief Executive, who's been cited on this previously, can answer. But presumably there's a significant cost to the development and construction and of that footway. I haven't seen the details myself, but I'm sure Mark can advise on this one.
Mark, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Leader. Yeah, just to reiterate, Councillor Williams has raised this with me, and indeed we've walked along it, Councillor Williams, I believe, a few years ago. I think the issue as described is that I think in concept terms it makes perfect sense, and it indeed may make sense in financial terms, but I'll need to revisit that. So I think when I did inquire about it, as the leaders indicated, there is a significant cost of providing that footway. So I suppose you weigh up ultimately whether the costs in one area, which are more limited but annual, are worth foregoing because you invest hundreds of thousands of pounds in creating that footway. I think my commitment will be that I'm happy to revisit it as you've raised it, and we'll get back to you specifically. But it's a good example where we do need to work through whether an upfront cost, which might be quite hefty, may make for ongoing revenue savings, which I think is the point you're making generally, yes.
Yes, it is, if I can come back.
Yeah. Certainly.
Yeah, because I know that this is one example in my ward, and I know that every member will have examples in their own wards, and it's working with us members as well and looking at where we know our wards, where we could potentially, like you say, because otherwise the school was built in 2015. We're now into the 8th year of paying for buses, which will be going on forever. And obviously we want to reduce our carbon footprint, and we're not going to do that if children are being bused from a couple of 100 metres from a school to that school.
Understood, but in a sense, you also perhaps answered the question as well, that the problem is that every member will have an issue and we won't be able to afford them all. So there will be an element of prioritisation in here as well. So, but I take the point that in this specific example, it's probably easy to identify the revenue costs of the buses as well, isn't it? But that's the challenge sometimes, is that we could probably walk, well, I did walk in every ward, and every member will have lots of issues that that they will identify that they want to address, and understandably so. I think it'll be about identifying the ones, particularly in our current circumstances, where it creates an immediate revenue saving. I think that would be the business case.
I'll make sure mine is sent to you this afternoon, Mark. Councillor Amanda Williams, would you like to come in on your second point?
My second one is on page 23, so I don't know if you've got anything on page 22 from anyone before you want me to jump onto that question.
If anyone's got anything on 22, please raise your hand. I can't see anyone indicating, Amanda, so over to you, Councillor Williams.
Great, thank you. It's on the 6% proposed uplift in council tax, and I just wanted to ask how we're going to ensure, because it's a question in the consultation, how are we going to give confidence to our residents that we'll take on board their opinion if we're already suggesting a figure here? Because I think I've looked in it and you can see some of the comments and the themes and a lot of people's comments, and it seems to be that they're against, the majority are against a significant uplift. So it's how are we going to ensure that they continue to do this consultation and are content that we're going to take everything on board, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. I'll ask the leader to answer this question.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because we've been in here now for a number of hours, and what hasn't been identified is a large range of savings that we can make this next year that don't come at a cost and would help us reduce the proposed council tax, and that is the difficulty for us, is that understandably, the residents are obviously concerned about their and understandably so their monthly bills, but we've got a responsibility in this chamber to set a budget, and as it stands, we haven't been able to identify significant other savings, and we haven't been able to identify as yet growth that we're not prepared to take forward. And if that is the case, then 6% is the figure that is currently proposed. And I think it's of note that there are councils across Wales that are proposing higher council tax increases currently. In fact, the highest, I think, is a 9% increase in council tax. So, of course, there is a range of figures, and every local authority in Wales is proposing to increase their council tax because they are grappling with the same challenges and difficulties that we are grappling with in this chamber. But I do, we take on board the point that Councillor Williams has made, that you've made, that all members have made, about the difficulty that some residents will experience in paying that, paying an increase in council tax.
Okay, thanks, Leader. Councillor Williams, would you like to come back on that at all?
Yes, please, and thanks very much. I think we've raised in a number of meetings about how we communicate all of this to our residents as well, and I think it's important to bring this in here about the understanding of where the money is spent and the services we provide, because I believe that there is still uncertainty out there. Residents don't realise, if you haven't got children or you don't have somebody who is being supported through social services, sometimes people don't understand exactly where the money goes. And I think we need to be more open and explaining everything to residents so they do appreciate why we're saying there's a need to potentially put council tax up. Thanks.
I would agree, Councillor Williams, that there is a communications issue here, in that people feel that the entirety of their council tax is how the local authority is funded, rather than just 27% or 27 pence in the pound. So that's an important point. I'll bring in the Chief Executive now, Mark, to build upon what the leader has said.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Williams. I wanted to actually just pick up Councillor Williams' point about the communication, because I think it's really valid. I think one of the challenges we're all going to face, whatever your political persuasions, this isn't a political point, is when we eventually come to an agreed budget, is communicating that in an effective way. So I think inevitably in a budget consultation, if you ask the public whether they'd rather no increase or a very small increase in their council tax, I don't think any of us be surprised that the majority will say, well, actually, yeah, that sounds about right, particularly in a cost of living crisis. But I think the challenge is trying to get over far better an understanding of what that might mean in terms of reductions in services, and things that the public would equally find unacceptable, unpalatable, or perhaps even distasteful in some cases. And we heard some of that earlier, didn't we, from Councillor Pennell Thomas and others about the things that the public value. So I do think communication is really important. We're trying to improve that. We've just recently produced a budget explainer, a video, which I think goes some way to doing that initially. What that does, Councillor Williams, is try to identify, first of all, where the money comes from in the way you described, and the different proportions of that. So council tax makes up a relatively small proportion of that, but also importantly, where the money goes, because I think historically we've always said, haven't we, that you wouldn't necessarily understand that 70% of our budget goes on schools and social care unless you directly were involved and understood that. So I do think the communication, both now but also arrive at an agreed budget, is going to be really, really important, because we've all said this morning, haven't we, that it comes down to choices. So it's striking that balance between level of council tax, level of cuts, and the level of growth that you wish to give to services. And I don't think anyone here would say that that's anything other than very, very difficult to achieve that to everyone's satisfaction. In fact, highly unlikely to achieve to everyone's satisfaction. So it's just coming up with something that allows us to deliver good public services, but also keep that council tax rise at a level that for most people is affordable, bearing in mind, as the leader highlighted earlier, the council tax reduction scheme and the help for those that are most vulnerable in that regard. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Amanda Williams, would you like to come back at all?
No, thank you.
Okay, well, I will build upon that, if I may, Mark and Leader, by going into a little bit more financial and economic detail as to why in the last 2.5 hours we haven't really necessarily come up with any solutions. Because on page 26, one category for the budget reduction proposals is identified as policy changes, and only 7% of these budget reduction proposals are identified as policy changes. Now, I'm wondering whether you feel that that is sufficient, or whether you think that we ought to actually be more radical in considering areas in which we provide a discretionary uplift in support beyond the statutory minimum service levels. Now, Councillor Gebbie's left the chamber, but if she were here, she'd be almost strangling me and saying that there is merit in providing discretionary services to minimise the impact on people having to access statutory services. So I do not believe that should be discounted. And while this may be desirable in uplifting our service levels and providing discretionary support, it has probably become a necessity to row back on some of those commitments. Now, beyond that, at 4.14.2 on page 27, you refer to one of the questions in the consultation, which is, how has the council performed in the past 12 months? Now, while people can answer from their own perspective in terms of their own service delivery, from a financial perspective, I'm not sure how we in this chamber as members can accurately answer that question if we don't have the detailed financial performance against the allocated budget by service area and even cost centre in each directorate. Now, I've made this point in a different forum, and Caris and Deb and their teams have taken this into account for the next financial year, and I'm very grateful for their engagement with me on this matter. So they know exactly what we need, I think, for future financial years, so that we can genuinely provide value to the Cabinet in your consideration of future budgets. However, here's to my question. When looking at the budget information for 22-23 as opposed to 21-22, there are some significant variances, both upwards and downwards, in individual cost centre budget allocations, which I, and I'm sure other members, would like to understand in more detail. I won't go into detail this morning because it's now this afternoon and it'll probably be this evening by the time I get through them all. But can I ask for an explanatory note to the next meeting of COSC on the 31st of January on those areas which you expect to see, or those areas which the corporate directors for each directorate expect to see significant variances in the 23-24 financial year? because that would be useful in determining next year's budget and making comment on the midterm financial strategy. I know that was long-winded, and a very complicated question, but I hope you gathered the question that I was trying to, and my observations which I was trying to make. Anyone want to make any comment, or it was generally an observation, but if anyone wants to make any comment, please do. Mark.
Only, Chair, to acknowledge that, to be fair to you've asked for some additional information of this sort consistently for a while, and we do acknowledge and understand that. And so I think you also accepted that some of what you'd requested might have been difficult this year. So I think the commitment really is that more fundamental look that you're describing is something that we should aim to do next year at an earlier stage, share with members. I don't suppose it necessarily makes it any easier to come up with the right decisions, but at least you'd have the information in front of you then to consider whether you think there are other things, and I think you use the term more radical things, that you might want to do or might want to propose. So I think we can commit to doing something additional for you as we have. As I say, my view is that it doesn't necessarily make the final decisions any easier, because you and I have already had conversations, and I could identify things to you now that I know we spend above the statutory minimum, but that doesn't necessarily follow that we'd agree that we should stop them, does it? So it's getting to that point really, though, and I understand the point you're making about having the relevant information. So just to acknowledge that we have taken that on board.
Thanks, Mark. I would agree that it's almost impossible to provide that information during this period of the budget setting process, but I'm very pleased that Caris and Deb and you have acknowledged what needs to happen in future, that we start the budget setting process much earlier in the financial year, and that we receive the workings out rather than just the answer, because I was always told in maths class to show my workings out. But I'll bring the leader in now to provide a little bit more context.
Thank you for that, Chair. We need to remember that most of the services that we deliver are statutory services. So our biggest budget is on education, and nearly all of our provision is statutory in terms of education. Our second biggest budget is on social services and wellbeing. Nearly all of that provision is statutory provision. So our room for manoeuvre is limited, actually, in terms of those discretionary services. And those discretionary services make up a small part of the budget, and indeed a shrinking part of the budget overall. So if you look at the growth proposals in front of you, they are nearly all in social services to deliver and discharge our duties around social care. The areas where we have do not have a strict statutory duty is around regeneration. So, and I know this committee and other committees have actually said that we should be revisiting the proposed saving around regeneration because of the match funding it levers into Bridgend. So in principle, considering those discretionary services may seem like an answer, part of the solution, but when you start to look at those limited discretionary services in detail, there are not big areas of expenditure there, and those areas of expenditure are often very precious and valuable to the communities and to members. Obviously, we can look at some specific areas, and if the committee do want to look at some specific areas, I'm sure we could do that, and we'd be happy to look at those areas. But they are limited in terms of the overall budget, in terms of their scale and the financial impact, and just to emphasise that indeed as a percentage of the budget, because if you look back over the medium-term financial strategy for recent years, the focus of the growth in the budget has been in our statutory statutory services. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Leader. That's really useful. We'll keep up the conversation on it in the next financial year. We hopefully will get some more detail on what are the discretionary services, how they actually benefit the local authority, what scope there is for any policy changes in that area which would satisfy you as the Cabinet to potentially reduce, because there aren't any easy decisions. We all appreciate that now, and the only scope for us to be able to reduce services will be in that discretionary element, regrettably, however much merit there is to supplement what we already do in statutory provision. So yes, I think to provide real value to you as a Cabinet, we do need to see the workings out and have some more detail. And I know that the financial team, led by Caris and Deb, are fully aware of my requests on this, and we'll start the process of the budget responsibility evaluation panel much earlier in the financial year to actually work together to come up with a unanimous decision on whether we can support a budget or not. Okay, moving on then, members, unless anyone else has any questions, up to page 27 to 28, that's 4.14 in your packs. We'll move to the remainder of section 4, that's the 2023-24 draft revenue budget, all the way up to page 32, and that is the end. Prudential borrowing. So are there any comments on any of those sections, all the way up to the end of section 4? Okay, just one brief thing from me then. I know, as I've already mentioned, that other scrutiny committees will be given detailed consideration to all of the different directorates which are under their purview. So I'll reserve my final comment to the Chief Executive's Directorate, which comes under our scrutiny, and to council-wide budgets. Out of a revised budget of £23.4 million, you're projecting a £1.17 million underspend in the Chief Executive's Directorate and a £7.98 million underspend in council-wide budgets. I'm assuming, Caris and Deb, that this is a result of in-year grants, perhaps relating to the COVID pandemic or other grants. And I appreciate that this underspend in council-wide budgets and the Chief Executive's Directorate significantly masks overall pressures in social services. However, for the forthcoming financial year, you've allocated a provisional uplift in the Chief Executive's budget of £1.31 million. Can I ask why you feel this is necessary given the current in-year underspend? Is it largely due to inflationary pressures, pay and prices, and the £700,000 which I previously referred to for housing and homelessness? Or are there any other reasons which you can cite for this increase in budget within the Chief Executive's Directorate? Caris, please.
Thank you, Chief. I mean, as you say, we are predicting an underspend in the current financial year. I think the reasons for that have already been outlined this morning. One is that we do have vacancies across a number of services, and as you've already heard, specifically in legal, which are resulting in underspends in the budget. We also have a base budget for our homelessness service, which when we set the budget this year, since then, we've had grant received from Welsh Government, which means that the spend we had anticipated in our budget is not being used within the Chief Exec's budget. Therefore, sorry, could you hear me? There was an echo there, wasn't there?
Yeah, your microphone dipped out slightly, Caris. I don't know whether you can just repeat the last sentence that you mentioned then.
So we have had grant in relation to the homelessness budget, which is helping our budget this year. No guarantees that will be there for next year. we have staff vacancies across a lot of the services, which means that, again, they're in posts that we anticipate filling during the coming year. So we wouldn't expect those to continue into next year. The rationale for the growth for next year, there are a couple of things in there for chief execs and countywide. You've already picked up on the homelessness one. Although there is money in the budget, we don't think it's enough. And I think the chief exec has already outlined this morning the number of people that we currently have in temporary accommodation. And we're working hard with those individuals, but members will be aware that we don't have the housing stock to be able to move people on. So we're anticipating increases in costs there. There's also money in there for the fire service precept, which is beyond our control, really. And they are putting in a larger than usual increase this year because of the pressures they've got, particularly around pay and price going forward. We are also obviously making some provision to support the ongoing support we need to give in relation to the Ukrainian families, and we've touched on that before. I think the important line for you is that £1 million that's in there. That's because this members will be aware from this financial year that the scenarios are changing dramatically and very quickly. So we have made provisions in our budgets around pay and around non-pay price inflation, but we're proposing that you put £1 million into this budget just in case things change again next year in a way that we've not been able to foresee, so that there is some money within the budget that we could allocate out if we need to.
Thanks very much, Caris. That's great. Okay, members, does anyone else have any comments on section 4 of the report, the remainder of section 4 of the report? That's up to page 35 inclusive. Okay, thank you very much. We move to section 5, 6, 7 and 8 of the report. That's the effect upon policy framework and procedure rules, the Equality Act 2010 implications, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015 implications, and financial implications. Okay, we'll therefore move to the appendices, and that is Appendix A, Midterm Financial Strategy 23-24 to 26-27. Appendix A, Budget Pressures. That's page 40. I think you've answered this question already, Caris, although if you haven't, please, or you want to expand upon it, please do. Just on CW2, that's council-wide, the £1 million which you've allocated, you felt that was sufficient in mitigating emerging council-wide pressures. Why did you come to that figure rather than any other?
We have allowed, sorry, Chair, we have allowed in the budget that's in front of you growth in relation to pay and non-pay, and we are hopeful. We've looked at how that compares to what other authorities have put in with regards to predictions. So we think, but we don't know, do we, how some of these issues will go. So we are conscious that a 1% change in the pay award, for instance, can result in a £2 million pressure on our budget. Therefore, it's a small percentage change can have a significant effect on spend in certain areas of the budget. Therefore, we've put in £1 million, thinking that we have allowed for growth in the budget, in the base budget that you've got. But should things change dramatically during the year, that would enable us to meet some of those additional costs.
Thanks, Caris. Thanks for that clarification. Councillor Bledsoe, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just on, well, all of the social services ones, bar SW1, I can see on SW1 that we've got a forward figure of for 2024-25, but on the remainder of the social services, we don't have a forward figure for 24-25. And I just wondered if there was a particular reason for that I know Carys has sort of answered that in a way there, but I just wondered if there was a particular reason for that.
Thanks, Councillor Brett. So I don't know whether this would be picked up in Scrutiny Committee to Scrutiny on Friday, but perhaps Carys has the information to hand.
Sorry, Chair, I wasn't sure if Carys is coming to our committee on Friday. Are you?
I am, yes.
I think
Would you prefer if I want to, if I ask that there?
I think
Carys is repeating herself 4 times in 1 week, so she'll probably be
sorry.
sleep in the budget and MTFS. I think so. Yeah, but you're perfectly willing to let her answer if you wish to do so, Carys.
I think what I was going to say is some of these cost pressures in here are relating to staffing levels, and if these pressures are approved, then any increase in the cost of those staff by way of increased pay, etc., will be picked up anyway through the budget. So there would be no reason to put that in as an additional cost pressure. And many of the others are around increased demand that the service is facing. And you can see that's coming in right across both adults and children's services. These are estimates from the services of what they would need to meet that demand at the current time. Now, what we'd have to review as we go through the MTFS every year we do this, we'd have to review whether that demand has plateaued out or whether or not it's continuing to increase. And that's work that the service is currently doing around modelling the demand to see whether actually it's now plateauing or whether or not they are still on an upward trajectory. And if they are on that upward trajectory, they would need to consider that for the following year's budget.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Carys. And obviously not to restrict members' questions because you don't sit on all different scrutiny committees, so please do raise issues here. But inevitably, these will be picked up in individual scrutiny committee meetings on education tomorrow, on social services on Friday, and then on communities on Monday. So this is specifically to discuss the Chief Executive's Directorate and council-wide pressures and corporate-wide pressures. Are there any other comments on Appendix A? Okay, we'll move to Appendix B now, Budget Reductions, page 43 of your packs. Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Thanks very much. On the Appendix A, I've reserved my questions for the other 2 committees that I'm on. I've got 2 questions on Appendix B. My first one is on COM4 and commercially let 2 wings of Ravenscourt to a partner organisation or business. And it says the savings would be predicated on reduction in utilities from not occupying the space and rental income. I wondered, first of all, it's amber, and I can appreciate why it would be amber in the cost of living crisis we're in, and it's unclear whether we'd be able to get somebody who would want to rent out the premises. But 2 questions from that is, firstly, are we already making sure we're not heating the whole of Ravenscourt, or we're not lighting the whole of Ravenscourt if we're only using a part of it, or we've only got a small team in there? And my second question on that is, why only 2/3 when we've got a lot of staff working from home and we know that we're not at capacity in Civic Centre as well? Why aren't we moving all of those staff into Civic if we're going on a more going forward, we're doing a lot more working from home? So that was my first one. And then I've got a question on COM5 as well.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Williams. I'm sure Mark can take that question first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Williams. I think I did answer some of this earlier, that a part of the risk and the reason it's amber is about timing, but also, as you say, Councillor Williams, I mean, I suppose no one can ever be certain that we would be able to let the wings. The current situation is that there are actually issues with the heating system in the building, which is one of the things we need to improve and resolve before we let out to other organisations. So that work is in hand, but I know that anyone who works there will tell you that it's not fantastic at the moment, unfortunately, particularly in cold weather. The broader piece about why we're not letting more of those wings or all of the building out. You may or may not be familiar that one of the wings is occupied by our MASH, our multi-agency safeguarding team. That was specifically moved. I think at one point it was based at Civic and it wasn't very effective. So I think it took an awful long time to identify a location to the satisfaction of all the partners. So I think while it could be considered, I think there would be a risk in moving that back to Civics. That counts for one wing. And in the other wing at the moment, we currently have a managed team of social workers who work very, very closely with the MASH. So again, it makes sense at the moment for those to be co-located. And that's as a result of the issues we've had in children's services over the last year or so, and a recognition really that we needed to put dedicated support in and to make the front door, if you like, work more effectively. But I don't dismiss what you're saying. I think we keep that under review, and in due course, as there's a greater understanding of what our requirements are as an organisation ourselves, then we can make other decisions moving forward. But in terms of the budget, which is what this is about, the immediacy is that we know that we can forgo 2 wings without a problem, as long as we can resolve the heating issues, etc. And it may well be that we come back to you with a further saving in due course for future years, which would extend beyond that. But I think it's probably a sensible and prudent approach at this time to do it in a phased way.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Williams, back to you.
Yeah, my other question. I don't know why I'm echoing. I think that's okay now. Com 5. This is firstly it's red, so we're saying it's not achievable, and then we've got the figure that we're now looking at 75%, which is an improvement, I think, on the original 100%. We're looking at saving £51,000 by not giving a donation to the RNLI. Now, I've got concerns with this because for the new members, they wouldn't have been here last year when it was agreed at council to give £50,000 to the golf tournament that's sponsored by Rolex in Porthcawl, because we were told it would encourage more people to come to Porthcawl and it would put Porthcawl on the map. If we're encouraging more people to come to Porthcawl and put it on the map, why are we then putting their safety at risk by taking this small element out of the budget? So I have concerns with that. So that's basically what I wanted to raise, and whether it's red because we don't think we are going to, because it's a simple yes or no. We're going to give this or we're not. So why is it red?
Thanks, Amanda. Mark?
Yeah, again, perhaps if I could just help a little bit. Part of the reason it's red is there are ongoing negotiations or discussions, or at least that's the intent, with the likes of Treco Bay. I think there was a discussion earlier this week about that, and also potentially with Porthcawl Town Council, and to see whether there are different ways of funding the current service. So, you know, we've made the point consistently this morning, haven't we, that these are draft proposals. Again, I probably anticipate that this is what you might get a reaction from both the public and elected members. But it also plays to your point, Chair, that ultimately, you know, it's a very valuable service and one I support, but it isn't a statutory service. There are plenty of beaches around the country that don't have lifeguarding. And perhaps it's one example of what you were describing earlier, where moving forward, however unpopular it is, we are going to have to at least consider these things. Now, I'm not saying that we necessarily should reduce our lifeguarding services. I genuinely recognise the value of it. In fact, I think I was probably the director when they were enhanced. But it's just that balance, as I've described all morning, really, Chair, about how do we do that, and if we can find alternative ways of providing the service by getting other contributions, then clearly we should look at that. So I hope that just provides additional context. But again, I'm you know, it's very difficult to disagree with what Councillor Williams has said. You know, in an ideal world, you absolutely would have lifeguarded beaches. It's part of your blue flag. It's part of what the attraction is of the area, but it's probably indicative of the challenges we face, Chair.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Williams, are you content, or would you like to come back in?
No, that's fine. But then if we're saying, you know, we're on the one hand, we're doing this and then that, we shouldn't be encouraging and promoting people to come somewhere by giving money for something and then taking away on the other, with the other hand. But thanks.
Yep. Understood, though, but one is a one-off and one is an ongoing revenue. You know, so there is a difference. So again, I understand the point you're making.
Thanks very much, both. Councillor Freya-Bledsoe, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come in on COM8, I did raise this about the removal of the waste enforcement team. I just wanted to ask if we feel this is a measure that's going to introduce further problems down the line and financial problems as well. Is it, you know, sorry, I can't remember the phrase. Is it a futile measure to remove it because there will be a cost implication further down the line? Obviously, if we don't hit our targets for recycling, etc., and fly tipping would become part of that, we would have to get rid of that fly tipping, and that would impact on our targets. Are we not going to be in a loss because we're cutting this service and we're not pursuing this this avenue for income generation? And I can see also it says red. So does that mean that this is still under discussion and it could be put back on the table? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Bledsoe. Mark?
Again, you may want to explore this in more detail, Chair, at the specific scrutiny, but for the benefit of members aren't on that committee, I think, you know, if I say everything's still under consideration, that I don't want you to start again, but I think, you know, inevitably this is the kind of controversial saving that we would anticipate that people might have strong views on. So again, it may well be it changes. I think the balance here is people talk about income generation. I don't think it's that easy to generate income from finding people for fly tipping. Our experience is it's incredibly difficult to get to the point where you know, you break even though commercial companies might promise you that when you outsource this sort of service. The reality is the burden of proof is quite high. And the other thing here, which is perhaps quite an emotive area, is that very often fly tipping isn't on our land. So again, it plays to your point about statutory and non-statutory. Obviously hugely desirable to remove fly tipping, but the reality is it's not a statutory requirement of the local authority to remove fly tipping from private land. Now, I deliberately throw that in because I think it's just illustrative, really, of how complex and how emotive this can get when we go down the route of statutory and non-statutory. But I take Councillor Bledsoe's point about one of the considerations would clearly be that if you didn't have the proper means of monitoring and enforcing fly tipping, you might, in due course, find that there are consequences, particularly if in due course we changed our waste collection services and we moved, as many authorities have, to perhaps even restrictions on some waste. I mean, we're not there yet, and that's a whole different debate. But I think the two things are linked, and I do understand that. But maybe something you want to explore with the director, you know, when specifically in that committee.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Bledsoe, would you like to come back?
Thank you. No, I'm content with that answer. And just to let you know, the word I was reaching for was false economy. So I was just having a bit of a blip. I couldn't think of the word, but thank you, Chief Executive.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bledsoe. I have blips all the time. So I understand, and it goes on from what I was saying earlier on about discretionary services having merit and then removing them, potentially meaning that statutory services have to intervene. So yeah, it's a careful balance to be struck. Are there any other comments on Appendix B? And don't forget to ensure that we make comments on the Chief Executive's Directorate and council-wide services, which comes under our remit. The only thing that I would say, Mark, to finish off, I guess, is I've already referred to the AMBER budget reduction proposal in ICT printing costs, which has already been answered. But did you consider any other options from within your directorate which you ended up rejecting?
May I come in, Chair? Yeah. Yes, we did, and perhaps this comes back to your working out point earlier. You know, rather than just the final conclusion, the workings out. The issue we have as a directorate, with the exception of the homelessness budgets, it's predominantly a budget that I think from memory is about 86-87% staffing. And so what we did have were various proposals in legal, HR, finance, but clearly hugely undesirable when we're already saying that those very services are struggling to support. So the challenge is we did have a number of things where people said, well, I could give up 2 lawyers or I could give up additional business partners in HR. But they were quickly rejected, frankly, on the basis that they would have a knock-on impact, a very, very strong knock-on impact to frontline services that are struggling. So I think the challenge for a service that is predominantly back office is that most of the budget is staffing, and it's the very things where we're already struggling in terms of capacity to support other services and support council services in the way that we desire. So yes, we did. And, you know, I suppose in certain circumstances you might have to revisit that, but they were predominantly staffing proposals, which, as I say, didn't seem sensible.
Thanks, Mark. That's very useful clarification. Are there any other questions on Appendix B, budget reduction proposals? Okay, we now move to consideration of Appendix C, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Assessment, pages 45 to 51, and I'll come to Councillor Heidi Bennett.
Sorry, Chair, I just want to give my apologies. I have to leave for carers' responsibilities now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bennett. Nothing on Appendix C? Okay, therefore, if there are no further questions on the report, can I thank all invitees, and you may leave the meeting at this stage. Thank you very much. We're going to have a short break for 10 minutes, and we will then ask the chair, that's me, and the scrutiny officer to summarise the key points that the committee has made in our conclusions and recommendations. So we'll return at 1:10. Thanks very much, everyone.